that it never really reaches any conclusion. They worry obsessively about what counts as anthropological knowledge and what it means to produce it. By the standards of science, anthropological research looks pretty weak. Yet anthropologists are still inclined to dress their inquiries in a scientific garb, masking conversation as elicitation, masking experiences of life as data for analysis, masking lessons learned as final results. And as for artists, who find increasingly that they have to present what they are doing as research in order to access the institutional and financial support on which they depend, to present and justify their work as research takes an even greater stretch of credibility. Must they pretend to behave like scientists? And if so, what are they trying to find out? And what kinds of knowledge do they think they can contribute that science cannot? Now, my aim in what follows is to reset the default. I want to show that art, and not science, is exemplary in the practice of research, and that anthropology could do well by explicitly following art's example. So instead of expecting artists and anthropologists to behave like scientists, we should put the boot on the other foot. The onus should be on scientists to explain how what they are doing in the harvesting and analysis of data and in its industrial conversion into knowledge productions can conceivably be regarded as research. If scientists were really researchers, would we not expect them to act a bit more like artists, or at least like anthropologists? Rather than seeking to hold the world to account, or to extract its secrets through force or deception, research would then mean going along with it, entering into its relations and processes, and following their evolution from the inside. Now, some scientists, of course, are already doing this, but they remain a dissenting minority, swimming against the currents of the mainstream. Of scientists, it seems that only these dissenters have absorbed the lesson that the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead taught almost a century ago, namely that there is no holding nature still and looking at it. For them, as indeed for artists and anthropologists, research is an experimental practice, but it's one in which every experiment is not just an action done, but an experience undergone, leaving neither the experimenter nor the things touched by it unchanged. Both have moved on, along with the world of which they are intrinsically a part. So in this, each experimental move, both doubles up on what was done before, but yet is an original intervention that invites a double in its turn. This, after all, is what the word research literally means. It is a second search, an act of searching again. To search again is not to repeat exactly what you did before. Between one search and the next, there is always a differential. It's like walking the same path or playing the same piece of music over and over. No walk, no performance can ever be identical to what went before. Every step is a new beginning. Or adopt a handy distinction from Gilles Deleuze and his collaborator Felix Guattari, research is a process not of iteration, but of itineration. It carries on, as life does, not closing in on solutions, but ever opening to new horizons. As you move, so does what you seek. But you press on, undeterred, driven by a desire that seems as insatiable and indeed as imperative as the will to live. And you call it curiosity. But you could also call it care, because both words, curiosity and care, are derived from the same Latin root, curare. It is about looking after, tending to things. Research, then, is not a technical operation, a particular thing you do in life for so many hours each day. It is rather a way of living curiously, that is, with care and attention. And as such, it pervades everything you do. And what are you looking for that so evades your grasp? What is it that always escapes, always overflows your most determined attempts to pin things down, that ever recedes beyond the horizon of conceptualization? I want to argue that this slippery, fugitive, and ineffable quality is truth. And in a world that is sustainable, research never ends because it is most fundamentally a search for truth. Now, for many today, truth is a scary word, better kept inside quotation marks, truth. It conjures up terrifying images of the violent oppression wreaked in the name of truth by those who have appointed themselves as its worldly ambassadors. But we should not blame truth for the wrongs committed in its name. The fault lies in its totalization, its conversion into a monolith that stands eternal like a monument, timeless and fully formed. And this rests on a delusion on the part of its self-appointed guardians that they themselves are above truth, that they are the masters of it, and that truth is theirs to command. Human history, as we know, is studied with delusional projects of this kind, each catastrophic for those subjected to it, and each ultimately smothered by the sands of time. Research, to the contrary, rests on the acknowledgement that we can never conquer truth any more than we can conquer life. Such conquest is for immortals. For us mortal beings, truth is always greater than we are, that is, always beyond what, at any moment, can be physically determined or grasped within the categories of thought. Truth is inexhaustible. So wherever or whenever we may be, we can still go further. That means research affords no final release into the light. Remaining ever in the shadows, we stumble along with no end in sight, doggedly following whatever clues afford a passage. This is hardly conducive to optimism, to the belief common among theorists of progress that the best of all worlds is only just around the corner, pending one or two final breakthroughs. But while it may not be optimistic, research is always hopeful. For in converting every closure into an opening, every apparent solution into a new problem, it is the guarantor that life can carry on, that is, of its sustainability. And for this very reason, research is a primary responsibility of the living. Now, if research, as I maintain, is the pursuit of truth, and if truth ever exceeds what is given, then there must always be more to research than the collection and analysis of data. It must go beyond the facts. The fact stops us in our tracks and blocks our way. This is how it is, it says. Proceed no further. I found this image of it on the internet. So that's what, get the facts and then stop. But even if the facts of a case may be incontrovertibly established, its truth lives on. And just take an example. The facts might determine that a criminal is guilty of a crime from the evidence. Yes, he definitely did it. But guilt lives on beyond. He still has to cope with guilt as a fact, as a truth in conscience. So guilt lives on beyond the facts of determining whether he did it or not. That's just an example. Now, this isn't to suggest the truth lies behind the facts, calling for a superior intelligence armed with theoretical power tools capable of breaking through the surface appearances or ideological mirrors that deceive the rest of us into thinking that we already can tell reality from illusion. We don't need theorists with heavy-duty equipment to clear the obstacles. Nor is it to suggest that truth lies within the facts, as some kind of unfathomable essence that will forever hide from us, sunk into itself, as self-proclaimed advocates of so-called object-oriented ontology like to tell us. It is rather to insist that what appear to us in the first instance as stoppages turn out, when we search again, that is, in our research, to be openings that let us in. It is as though the fact rotated by 90 degrees. Imagine that sign, like that going like this. Rotates by 90 degrees like a door on opening, so that it no longer confronts us face on, but aligns itself longitudinally with our own movements. And where the fact leads, we follow. Come with us, it says. What had once put an end to our search then reappears in research as a new beginning, a way into a world that is not already formed, but is itself undergoing formation. It's not that we have broken through the surface of the world to discover its hidden secrets. Rather, as the doors of perception open and as we join with things in the relations and processes of their formation, the surface itself vanishes. So the truth of this world is not to be found out there, established by reference to the objective facts, but is disclosed from within. And indeed, it is the very matrix of our existence as worldly beings. And we can have no knowledge of this truth, save by being in it. So knowing in being is of the essence. Now this conclusion will of course be anathema to those who hold that true knowledge of the world can be had only by taking ourselves out of it and by looking at it from a distance. For them, objectivity is the very hallmark of truth. And it is indeed understandable that in a world, our world, where facts often appear divorced from any kind of observation, where they can be invented on a whim, propagated through mass media, and manipulated to suit the interests of the powerful, regardless of their veracity, and you all know what I'm talking about, we should be anxious about the fate of truth. To many it seems that in this era of post-truth, we are cast adrift without an anchor. And we are right to insist that there can be no proper facts without observation. But we are wrong, I believe, to suppose that observation stops at objectivity. For to observe, it is not merely enough to look at things. We have to join with them and to follow. And it is precisely as observation goes beyond objectivity that truth goes beyond the facts. This is the moment in our observations when the things with which we study begin to tell us how to observe. In allowing ourselves into their presence, rather than holding them at arm's length, that is, in attending to them, we find that they are also guiding our attention. And attending to these ways, we also respond to them as they respond to us. Research then becomes a practice of correspondence and of care. It is a labor of love, giving back what we owe to the world for our own existence as beings within it. Researchers' correspondence in this sense is not just what we do, but what we undergo. It is a form of experience. Because in experience, things are with us in our thoughts, dreams, and imaginings as we are with them. And it's here, I believe, that we can begin to see where science can align with art and indeed with anthropology. It means calling into question the division between fact and fantasy, or between truth and illusion, which has underpinned the development of science ever since the days of Francis Bacon and Galileo Galilei. Let us learn to dream, declared the chemist Auguste Kekulé in a lecture to celebrate his discovery of the benzene molecule. Then perhaps we shall find the truth. But let us beware, he went on, let us beware of publishing our dreams till they have been tested by waking understanding. So for Kekulé, and for the majority who think like him, if science needs art, it is to fantasize, to give the mind freedom to roam, to come up with novel ideas, but only when tested against the facts can ideas born of the imagination lay any claim to truth. Now, were research only about the establishment of such truth claims, then indeed it would admit to neither imagination nor experience in its experimental operations. But if truth lies beyond the facts, then science can become research only insofar as it is willing to forego objectivity and to follow the way of art and of anthropology into a correspondence that unites experience and imagination in attending to a world that also attends to us. It would be for science, too, to join in the pursuit of truth as a way of knowing in being through practices of curiosity and care. And therein, I think, lies the proper vocation of research. Now, I now want to turn to the third part of my argument. I mean to show that only if it is conceived as a conversation or as a practice of correspondence can research be conducive to the continuation of those relations and processes of world formation or renewal on which our collective futures depend. In short, research as correspondence is a condition for sustainability. Now, I admit that for many of us, the notion of sustainability has been devalued by overuse and compromised through its co-option by powerful interests whose overriding concern has been for their own survival in a world of ever more intense competition for dwindling planetary resources. And yet I believe sustainability is a notion we cannot do without, and that to give up on it would be tantamount to an abandonment of our responsibility towards coming generations. The challenge then is to give meaning to a term that paradoxically combines the idea of an absolute limit with the limitlessness of carrying on forever. Real sustainability, I argue, begins at the moment when the doors of perception swing open, when objectivity gives way to the search for truth, or finality to renewal, whereupon what appears from the outside as a limit opens up from within into a space of growth, movement, and transformation, to limitless possibility, or in a word, to everything. Sustainability cannot be of some things and not others. It can countenance no boundaries of inclusion and exclusion. It must be of everything, or it is nothing. So what kind of everything can always surpass itself, always have room for more, without at any moment appearing partial or incomplete? So what follows is my attempt at an answer. For those of us, and that's probably all of us here, for all of those of us educated in the ways of modern science, our inclination is to conclude with everything rather than to begin from it. And we reach a conclusion, we think, only by adding things up. We add and we add numbers of people, numbers of species, numbers of objects of this or that kind, numbers of characters on the page, numbers of stars in the sky, numbers of cells in the body, numbers of atoms on a pinhead. We are bamboozled by numbers, many of a magnitude that defy comprehension. But to add things up, they have first to be broken off from the processes that gave rise to them, from the ebbs and flows of life. You must be able to tell where one thing ends and another begins. The world must be rendered discontinuous. We soon discover, however, that some things are difficult, if not impossible, to enumerate. Try counting clouds in the sky, waves in the ocean, trees in the wood, fungi. The difficulty is that these things are always forming and dissolving, growing and decomposing, appearing at some times to merge and at other times to break up. Take clouds, for example. Clouds are not discrete objects suspended in the sky. They are rather folds of the sky itself, moisture-laden formations of the turbulent and crumpled mass of atmospheric air. Waves, too, are folds, ever forming at the surface where the ocean in its intercourse with the sky is whipped up by the wind. You could perhaps count waves as they wash up upon the shore, much as you could count footsteps, breaths, or heartbeats. But what would they amount to? A life, perhaps, with breaths, steps, and heartbeats, or eternity with the waves. Counting would not be adding up a world, but the rhythm of time passing. With trees and fungi, addition is just as impracticable. Who can say how many trees there are in a wood? True, you could measure up, as foresters do, estimating the number and volume of trunks in the stack when a plot is felled. But in so doing, you have already, in your mind's eye, cut each tree from all that nourishes it and gives it life. You've cut it from the soil, the fungi that wrap around its roots, from the air, the sunlight that fuel its growth. And to count fungi is merely to enumerate the fruiting bodies, ignoring the underground mesh of the mycelium from which they spring. But is it really any different with people? Are they any easier to count than clouds, waves, trees, and fungi? Can you arrive at everybody by counting heads? The head, after all, is part of a body that topologically is not a closed container, but an open vessel. Its surface is so intricately infolded that it is practically impossible to distinguish its interior and exterior regions. Normally, we see only one part of every person, namely the fleshy part. The part we don't see is the breath, the air we inhale and exhale, and without which we could not live. Like trees in the wood, people intermingle with one another. They go in and out of each other's bodies, in beguiling phrases of Maurice Bloch, even as they breathe the air. And their voices, carried on the breath and permeating the atmosphere, they mingle also, sometimes joining as in the unison of song, sometimes splitting apart as they lift up over one another without ever separating into discrete sounds. You may, through an act of differential attention, be able to tell one voice from another, or to split them along the grain of their becoming, but you cannot count them up. In the correspondence of voices, that is, in the conversation, everyone, like everything, is an intermingling. Not a totality arrived at by the addition of its individual elements, but what I shall call a plenum. The plenum is not a space filled up to capacity with things. It is fullness itself. The things we find there, as we've seen with clouds, waves, trees and people, emerge as folds, ever forming by way of the turbulence of lively materials. Now we have many words to describe the plenum: world, cosmos, nature, earth. But does the world contain holes that remain to be filled? Are there gaps in the cosmos, voids in nature, empty spaces in the earth? We might regard a patch of ground as a site on which to build. It must first be cleared of obstructions like trees and boulders. Foundations must be dug, materials gathered and assembled. But to clear the ground is not to leave a void, but to smooth it out, as when you remove a crease from a fabric. And to build is not to refill the space, but once again to crease up the ground, pressing it into the rising forms of walls and the vault of the roof. Thus, every infill is in reality a reworking, a doubling up that introduces a kink, twist, or knot into the very fabric of the earth. Or to put it in the terms of the physicist David Bohm, the order of the plenum is implicate. In the implicate order, according to Bohm, everything is enfolded into everything. Things that to our senses might appear solid, tangible, and visibly stable, like a building here, or a tree, or a boulder there, each occupying its particular region of space or moment in time, these things are truly but the envelopes of a spatio-temporal polo movement wherein everything is formed. Let's put one more picture here. I want to take Bohm's insight one step further to argue that the order of the plenum is not so much implicate as complicate. Whereas implication connotes a folding inward from side to side, complication carries the sense of folding forward, that is, of things convoluting longitudinally, braiding or plaiting along the lines of their own growth and movement. This actually comes from great work of Gottfried Semper on the elements of architecture from the mid-19th century. So this is material folding on itself as it goes along. And as it does so, it endlessly overflows any formal envelopes within which it may appear temporarily to have been pulled aside or detained. The plenum, then, is limitless, not because its capacity can always be increased, but because it always carries on. We don't ask the ocean whether it has room to accommodate a few more waves. Nor does the ocean respond like an overbooked hotelier. Unfortunately, we are full up. Because the waves are ever forming, even as they break on the shore. The plenum, in short, belongs to time, or perhaps indeed the plenum is time. Everything in the sense of the plenum is not an ultimate conclusion, not the sum total when all is added up, but pure beginning. Well, let's recall Whitehead's words, there is no holding nature still and looking at it. For Whitehead, nature was always self-surpassing, or in a word, concrescent. That's the word that Whitehead coined, concrescence. Con literally means together. Crescent literally means undergoing creation rather than already created. The crescent moon, for example, is getting created, it's not dead. So concrescent means undergoing creation together. So in a concrescent world, everything is perpetually undergoing creation together. Trees growing together in the wood, people living together in society, their voices carrying on together in conversation. This doesn't mean, of course, that the plenary world is only half-formed or incomplete, because incompletion can only be judged in relation to a state of finality. In the plenum, nothing is final, and every ending is an unfinishing. So to return to my theme of sustainability and to the question with which I began, how can we imagine a world that is sustainable for everyone and everything for now and evermore? The philosopher William James, in a lecture delivered in 1908, already gave a hint as to the answer. We have to think of the world, he said, as a pluralistic universe, or in short, a pluriverse. Pluriverse rather than universe. The pluriverse is not many rather than one, not a collection of separate worlds rather than a singular universe. It is rather one in its openness, in its admission to infinite differentiation, that is, in its multiplicity. This world, as James put it, is not rounded in and closed, like a globe, but strung along, ever ramifying along the multiple kinks, creases, and folds of emergent form. For the anthropologist Arturo Escobar, writing for us today, but with acknowledgement to James, sustainability is precisely about designing for a pluriverse, or in his words, for the earth as a living whole that is always emerging out of the manifold biophysical, human, and spiritual elements that make it up. So far from ending with the world as a totality, joined up and complete, this would be a practice of design that begins with the world as a plenum, whose very mode of existence lies in the perpetual unfinishing of things, in the digestion of ends and their extrusion into pure beginning, and at the threshold, turning endings into beginnings, easing the passage of things from old life to new, stands the figure of the designer, the maker, or the artist. So in Design for a Pluriverse, sustainability is not about the preservation of form, it is about the continuity of life. And the contrast between this view and the mainstream science-based rationale of sustainability could not be more extreme. For the aim of the latter is to harness or capture the power of world renewal and to put it to use in the production of so-called renewables. This is to turn beginnings into endings, to turn the transformative power of a living earth into goods and services for human consumption. In the rationale of sustainable development, the world is understood not as a plenum to be inhabited, but as a totality to be managed, much as a company manages its portfolio by balancing the books. At the point of balance, the supply of renewables precisely matches consumer demand. Now, in theory, if the world and everything in it could be poised on this point, then it could be kept forever in a state of dynamic equilibrium. But sustainability would then have been bought at the expense of putting life and history permanently on hold. The future could be no more than a protraction of the present. And to design for such a future would surely be self-defeating. If our predecessors had succeeded in designing a sustainable world, what future would remain for us except to fall into line with their already imposed imperatives? Alternatively, were it to fall to us to design sustainably for our successors, then they in turn would become mere users or consumers tied to the implementation of a design already made for them. Design, it seems, must fail if every generation is to look forward to a future that it can call its own. That is, for every generation to begin afresh, to be a new generation. Or to adopt a maxim from the environment,